The marketplace pulsed with life, hot, crowded, and filled with the sharp scent of spice and sizzling meat. Voices overlapped in a chaotic symphony of barter and trade, merchants shouting over one another as they pushed their goods onto disinterested passersby. Banners of deep crimson and gold fluttered above stone archways, marking the wealthier districts just beyond. Here, in a lower sector, the roads were cracked, the stalls mismatched and hastily constructed, and the merchant's patience thin. For someone like Naari, it was dangerous ground. She kept her head low, the hood of her tattered cloak drawn over her face, masking the vibrant violet hair that marked her as an outcast. She had spent hours here, weaving through the crowd, lingering near the food stalls without drawing attention. It had taken time to find the right target, a vendor distracted, a moment of carelessness. But time was something she had little of. The child in her arms was too still, his small blue-skinned body barely stirring against her chest. His breaths were soft, too soft. If she pressed her lips to his forehead, she would feel the unnatural chill of his skin. He needed food. She had tried to beg before. It had gotten her nothing but cruel laughter, the occasional boot to the ribs. A widow without a name had no place in their world, so she would take what was needed. Her stomach clenched as she reached out, fingers brushing the warm crust of a fresh loaf of bread. She had done this before, back when her husband had been alive, quick, unnoticed, slipping through the crowd before anyone was the wiser. But grief had made her slow. Hunger had made her weak. The moment her hand closed around the bread, a thick, clawed hand latched onto her wrist. A wave of ice shot through her veins. Thief! The word cut through the noise, and suddenly, all eyes were on her. The merchant was a broad-chested, horned brute, his deep-set eyes burning with outrage as he wrenched her forward, nearly toppling her off balance. She instinctively curled inward, shielding the child. The crowd reacted just as she expected. Some shook their heads in disapproval. Others barely looked at all, stealing from honest laborers. The vendor's voice boomed, his grip tightening painfully. From those who work for their food. Look at her, an unidentified widow. Nope, better than the gutter filth. The word stung, but Naari had heard worse. She did not fight, did not beg. It would only make things worse. The merchant yanked the bread from her grip and tossed it onto the stall's counter. What's the punishment for thieves like her these days, eh? He looked to the gathered onlookers, seeking approval. Shall I take a finger? Maybe a hand? The murmurs swelled around her, but no one objected. No one ever did. Then, a new voice. Calm, steady, human. I'll pay for it. The merchant hesitated, his grip faltering. The crowd shifted slightly, turning toward the source of the interruption. A man stood a few paces away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a roughness to his features that spoke of someone who had seen his share of fights. Naari had seen humans before, off-worlders, traders, mercenaries. Most of them ignored her kind. Why was this one stepping in? The merchant snorted. This is not about credits, human. It's about justice. The man, Garrick, didn't flinch. Justice. He tilted his head slightly, his voice deceptively casual. For stealing bread? His dark eyes flickered toward Naari. She wasn't filling her pockets to resell it. She was feeding her kid. The crowd didn't care. The merchant bared his teeth. You do not wish to interfere in this. Something in Garrick's posture shifted, an edge of unspoken warning, like a blade just out of sight. I already have. He tossed a few battered credits onto the counter. That should cover it. The merchant's lip curled, but he took the money, shoving it into his pouch with a muttered curse. It changes nothing, he sneered. She is nothing. The words should have meant nothing to Naari. And yet, she felt their weight press against her ribs like a crushing stone. Garrick ignored the merchant, turning to her instead. Are you hurt? She did not answer, did not move. Can you walk? A long pause. Then finally she nodded. The crowd was already losing interest. The spectacle was over, and the vendors had sales to make. The merchant muttered under his breath, waving Garrick off like an insect, already moving on to his next customer. But Naari remained frozen. She should run. should take her child and disappear before this human decided his kindness had been a mistake. Instead, she hesitated. Garrick's voice softened. Let's get out of here. For the first time, she truly looked at him. And in that moment, when the crowd no longer watched, when it was just them, her arms brushed against his. It was nothing, a fleeting touch, but she felt warmth. The simple, human warmth of another body, something she had not felt in a long time. She recoiled instinctively, her throat tightening. She had been alone for so long, had forced herself to forget what it was to be close to another. And yet, for a heartbeat, she wanted to lean into it. Instead, she pulled back, clutching her child tightly. Garrick didn't react. He simply waited. After a long, uncertain moment, Naari took a slow step forward. He fell in a step beside her. Neither of them spoke. But as they moved away from the marketplace, she could still feel the ghost of his warmth on her skin. Naari followed Garrick through the twisting back alleys of the city, the weight of her child pressing against her chest like an anchor. The further they moved from the marketplace, the quieter the streets became. Here, the air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and rusted metal. The walls of the narrow passageways lined with grime. The towering structures that loomed above them were remnants of an older era, crumbling walkways, shattered windows, and cables hanging in tangled knots. This was where the forgotten lived. She should not be following this man. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear before he could demand something in return for his kindness. No one helped without wanting something. And yet, she had nowhere else to go. Her son stirred weakly in her arms, a soft whimper escaping his lips. She tightened her hold on him, brushing her fingers gently over his too thin cheek. His fever had worsened. Every day, he grew weaker. If she didn't find a way to get food, medicine, he wouldn't last much longer. Garrick stopped abruptly at the mouth of an abandoned structure. Its entrance half collapsed. The metal framework bent inward as if something had struck it with immense force. This is safe enough for now, he said, glancing over his shoulder. No patrols come through here. Naari hesitated at the threshold, her fingers tightening around the edges of her cloak. The dim interior smelled of dust and old machinery, the remnants of long-dead technology lying scattered across the floor. Rusted storage containers lined the far wall, their markings faded beyond recognition. A human helping her was already strange enough. Trusting one was a different matter entirely. You can sit, Garrick added, his voice quieter now, less commanding. You look like you need it. She did. Her legs ached from exhaustion, her body hollowed out by hunger and worry. But she refused to show weakness in front of him. Instead, she knelt slowly, settling her child onto the worn ground beside her. He barely stirred, his breaths shallow. The sight made something inside her twist painfully. Garrick exhaled and crouched a short distance away, pulling a ration pack from his jacket. He tore it open and extended a small, dense block of compressed nutrients toward her. Here, he said, it's not much, but it'll help. Naari's fingers hesitated inches from the offering. There had to be a catch. She lifted her gaze to meet his, searching for the hidden cost, the expectation behind the gesture. But Garrick's expression remained unreadable, his dark eyes steady. You don't have to take it, he said after a moment, his tone carefully neutral. But your kid needs it more than your pride does. The word stung, but he wasn't wrong. Swallowing her hesitation, she took the ration and broke off a small piece, pressing it gently against her child's lips. He barely responded at first, too weak to register what was happening, but after a moment, his tiny mouth parted, and he took in the food. Relief flooded her. She fed him slowly, rationing each bite, watching as a bit of color returned to his face. Only when he had eaten enough to settle did she allow herself to take a bite, forcing herself to chew despite the dry, chalky texture. Garrick leaned back against a rusted crate, arms crossed over his chest as he studied her. You got a name? Naari stiffened. A name. She had stopped thinking of herself as a person with a name long ago. Widowhood had stripped her of that right. She was nothing, a ghost, an exile. Still, the question lingered between them. She could lie, but what was the point? Naari, she finally said, her voice quieter than she intended. Garrick nodded slightly. And the kid? Her fingers brushed over her son's delicate forehead, feeling the warmth of his skin. Kale. Another nod. Garrick didn't ask anything else, and for that, she was grateful. Instead, he let the silence stretch, as if waiting for her to ask something in return. She should. She should demand to know why he helped her, why a human would bother to intervene when no one else did. But she was afraid of the answer, so she said nothing. The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. Finally, Garrick broke it. They'll come looking for you, he said. That merchant won't let it go. She knew that. He was humiliated, Garrick continued. And men like that don't like losing face. Naari lowered her gaze. She had expected as much. It was only a matter of time before enforcers tracked her down. If you have somewhere safe to go, you should get there before nightfall, he added. She didn't. There was nowhere left for her on this planet. Still, she said nothing. Garrick exhaled and rubbed a hand over his jaw. You don't trust me. That's fine. He pushed himself to his feet. But I'm not going to stand by while they tear you apart over a loaf of bread. Naari tensed. There was something dangerous in his voice, not towards her, but toward the ones who had nearly beaten her in the marketplace. She didn't understand this human, didn't understand why he would risk getting involved. You shouldn't interfere, she said finally, her voice sharper than she intended. You don't know what you've done. Garrick let out a dry laugh. Oh, I know exactly what I've done. He took a step closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the dim space. The real question is, what are you going to do now? Naari had no answer. She had spent so long surviving from one moment to the next that she had never allowed herself to think beyond that. But now, she had a human standing in front of her, offering something she had thought impossible. A choice. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure what to do with it. The night air was thick with the scent of damp stone and rusted metal, clinging to Naari's skin like an unwanted second layer. The abandoned shelter was cold, lifeless, a forgotten husk of a building that had long since lost its purpose. Broken beams jutted from the walls like skeletal remains, and the faint hum of the city beyond barely reached this part of the ruins. She sat against the far wall, her arms wrapped protectively around Lior, his small body curled into her side. His breathing was shallow, but at least it was steady. The thin ration Garrick had given them had helped, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. She should have left already. The human had done his part, saved her from the marketplace, given her food, warned her about the merchant's grudge. She owed him nothing, and yet she stayed, her body too drained, her mind too clouded with exhaustion to move. Garrick sat across from her, leaning against an overturned crate, watching her with that same unreadable expression. His presence filled the space, solid and unmoving. He wasn't pressing her for answers, wasn't making demands, just waiting. It unnerved her. No one helped without expecting something in return. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her cloak as she met his gaze. Why? His brow lifted slightly. Why what? Why did you help me? The question had burned in the back of her mind since the moment he stepped between her and the merchant. A human interfering on behalf of an unidentified widow? It made no sense. Garrick exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders before answering. Because someone should have. Naari's jaw tightened. That wasn't an answer. You don't know me, she pressed. You don't know what I've done, what I am. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. I know you were desperate enough to steal in broad daylight. I know you put yourself at risk for your kid. That's enough. She frowned, frustration curling in her chest. It wasn't enough. She needed to know why this human, of all people, had stepped in when no one else had. What did he gain from this? Garrick leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. What do you think I want, Naari? She stiffened at the sound of her name. She had given it to him, but hearing it from his lips felt dangerous. Everyone wants something, she said carefully. Food, credits, information, power. Her fingers brushed over Lior's thin shoulder. People don't help without a reason. Garrick let out a quiet huff, something that wasn't quite a laugh. Maybe I just don't like seeing people kicked when they're already down. Naari scoffed. And I'm supposed to believe that. His expression didn't change. Believe what you want. Doesn't make a difference to me. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because he wasn't lying. She didn't know how she knew, whether it was the way he spoke, the way he held himself, or the way he had given her food without hesitation. But he meant it, and that terrified her, because if he was telling the truth, then maybe he was different, and she couldn't afford to believe in differences. Lior stirred beside her, letting out a soft, weak whimper. Nahari's attention snapped back to him, her heart lurching. She smoothed a hand over his forehead, feeling the unnatural heat beneath his cool skin. His small fingers clutched at the fabric of her cloak, seeking comfort even in sleep. He was getting worse. Her stomach twisted painfully. She had thought she had more time, but now she wasn't so sure. Garrick was still watching her. She didn't look up. "If you have somewhere safe to go," he said after a moment, "you should get there before morning." Nahari's fingers stilled against Lior's forehead. He thought she had options, that she had a plan, that she was waiting for the right moment to leave. She wasn't. There was nowhere. No family. No friends. No allies. Just a world that wanted her gone. She swallowed hard and shifted Lior in her arms, adjusting the way he rested against her chest. "I'll figure it out." Garrick's gaze flickered, but he didn't call out the lie. Instead, he pushed himself to his feet with a quiet sigh. "Then I'll walk you out of the district when you're ready." Nahari blinked up at him. "Why?" Garrick shrugged. "Because someone should." That answer again. It should have irritated her. Instead, it made something in her chest tighten. Before she could respond, a distant sound cut through the silence. Heavy boots on stone. Her breath caught. Garrick reacted immediately, stepping toward the doorway, his entire posture shifting from relaxed to razor-sharp focus. Patrol. They were looking for her. Nahari's pulse thundered in her ears. If they found her, if they found Lior, she reached out instinctively, catching Garrick's wrist before he could step outside. He stilled at the contact. "Don't," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his skin. "If they see you, they'll ask questions." For a second, just a second, his dark eyes locked onto hers. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled free. Nahari recoiled as if burned, her stomach twisting at the loss of warmth. She clenched her jaw, pushing the feeling aside. This wasn't the time. Garrick turned back to the doorway, his voice low. "Stay out of sight. No noise." She nodded stiffly and pulled Lior closer, tucking them both into the shadows. The voices outside grew louder, commanding, arrogant. Nahari held her breath. Then Garrick spoke. His voice was steady, controlled. Too far away for her to hear the words, but she caught the tone. Casual, unbothered, a man with nothing to hide. The patrol didn't answer immediately. The air in the shelter felt suffocating. Then footsteps retreating. Nahari didn't exhale until the silence stretched long enough to be certain. A moment later, the door creaked open again, and Garrick stepped inside. "They're gone," he said simply. She stared at him. Just like that, he had lied to them, risked himself again for her, for Lior. She didn't understand him, didn't understand why. Garrick sat back down like nothing had happened, stretching his arms over his knees, as if this was normal. As if saving a stranger didn't matter. Nahari curled her fingers into Lior's cloak, staring at the man who had interfered in her life not once, but twice now. She didn't trust him. She couldn't trust him. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to. The air inside the abandoned shelter was thick with quiet tension. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching across rusted beams and broken consoles, remnants of a place long forgotten. The city's distant hum barely reached this part of the ruins, leaving the space eerily still. Nahari had spent years surviving in silence, but this was different. This silence had weight. She sat with Lior tucked against her, his small body warm despite his fever. His breathing had steadied after the food, but he was still weak, still too fragile. Every time his tiny fingers twitched in sleep, a fresh wave of unease tightened in her chest. Across the room, Garrick leaned against an overturned crate, arms crossed, watching her with the same unreadable expression he always wore. He hadn't spoken since the patrol had left, but he hadn't left either. That was the problem. Nahari had expected him to walk away, once the danger had passed. He had no reason to stay, but here he was, and she didn't know what to do with that. She shifted, adjusting Lior's weight against her. You don't have to keep watching me. Garrick let out a low breath, almost a laugh. You think I'm watching you? She met his gaze. Aren't you? His lips quirked slightly, but the amusement didn't reach his eyes. I'm waiting. For what? Garrick tilted his head slightly, studying her. For you to stop pretending you have this figured out. Her chest tightened, because he was right. But she wouldn't admit that. Not to him. I don't need your help. The words felt thin, even as she said them. Garrick didn't argue. He didn't push. He simply gave a slow nod, as if acknowledging something neither of them had said out loud. Then he stood. Naari tensed instinctively as he crossed the room, his movements easy but deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for the dim light to catch the sharp angles of his face. I'll be gone by morning, he said simply. Whatever you decide to do next, that's up to you. Something cold and sharp settled in Naari's stomach. This should have been what she wanted. She should have felt relieved that he wasn't trying to force her into a debt, that he wasn't demanding anything in return, that he was offering her a choice and nothing more. But instead, all she felt was trapped, because without him, she had nothing, and she hated that. Lior stirred against her chest, a weak, sleepy whimper escaping his lips. She immediately soothed him, brushing a hand over his forehead, feeling the fever still clinging to his skin. Garrick watched, his gaze flickering to the child before settling back on her. If you stay here, the next patrol won't just walk away. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. A quiet warning. They'll find you. And this time, I won't be there. The words sent a fresh wave of unease through her. He was right again. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus on Lior, on the slow rise and fall of his breathing. She had survived this long by being careful, by avoiding risks, by trusting no one. But careful wasn't enough anymore. Lior wouldn't last if they kept hiding in the shadows, scavenging scraps, running until there was nowhere left to go. She needed a way out. And right now, Garrick was the only door left open. The realization made her stomach twist. She exhaled slowly, then looked up at him. And if I go with you? Garrick's gaze didn't waver. Then we figured out. That wasn't an answer, but it was more than she had. The silence stretched between them, heavier than before. Naari knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, and she wasn't sure if she had anything left to give. But when she looked down at Lior, his fragile form, his too thin frame, the soft, unconscious way he pressed against her for warmth, she knew the choice had already been made. The city pressed in around them, heavy with the weight of rain-soaked metal and decaying stone. The alleys they moved through were narrow and dark, littered with remnants of a world that had long since forgotten people like Naari and her son. Above, the towering structures of the wealthier districts loomed in the distance, their neon signs casting an eerie glow against the low-hanging smog. Naari's arms ached from carrying Lior, but she refused to loosen her grip. His small, fevered body was a constant reminder of how little time they had left. His blue skin, normally vibrant with life, had taken on a sickly pallor. He barely moved now, his breath warm and uneven against her chest. They needed shelter. They needed food. They needed a way out. But all she had was Garrick. He moved ahead of her, his steps controlled, practiced. His sharp gaze flickered to every shadow, every open window, scanning for unseen dangers. He had the movements of a man used to watching his back, used to expecting a fight. Naari didn't trust him. She had chosen to follow, but trust? That was something she had given up on a long time ago. Yet here she was, placing her son's fragile life in the hands of a man she barely understood. Ahead, Garrick stopped suddenly. Naari tensed, instincts flaring as she pressed herself into the shadows. Voices, distant but drawing closer. She held her breath. The sound of boots against stone, heavy, deliberate. Patrol. Her heart slammed against her ribs. They were searching for her. Garrick turned his head slightly, listening. Then, without hesitation, he reached for her wrist and pulled her deeper into the alley's maze of twists and dead ends. Naari stiffened at the sudden touch, but she didn't resist. There was no time. His grip was firm, steady, not rough, not cruel, just certain. She hated how much that unsettled her. The alley narrowed, forcing them closer together. The walls were damp with condensation, the ground uneven beneath their hurried steps. Garrick moved without hesitation, leading her through the labyrinth as if he had walked these paths 100 times before. Then suddenly he stopped. Naari nearly crashed into him, swallowing a curse as he pressed his back against the wall, pulling her close to do the same. She could hear the patrol now, closer than before. Her pulse thundered. If they were caught, if they found Lior. Garrick leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't move," he whispered. She froze. The voices were right at the alley's mouth now. One of the patrolmen let out a frustrated growl. "They should have passed through here by now. Maybe the merchant was wrong," another muttered. "Said she had a kid with her. Wouldn't get far like that." Naari clenched her jaw, gripping Lior tighter. "We keep looking," the first man said. "Orders are clear. Bring her in." The footsteps moved away. Slowly, Naari forced herself to stay still, even as her lungs burned with the need to breathe, to run. Garrick waited a few seconds longer before he finally exhaled and stepped back. "They're gone," he murmured. Naari sucked in a slow, steadying breath. Garrick watched her carefully. "You okay?" It was such a stupid question. No, she wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay in a long time. But she just nodded once, because what else was there to say? Garrick studied her for a moment longer, then gestured ahead. "We need to keep moving." She adjusted Lior in her arms and followed, her legs burning from exhaustion. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds their soft footfalls against damp stone. Finally, Naari couldn't hold back any longer. "Where exactly are we going?" Garrick didn't look back. "There's a transport hub outside the lower district. I have a contact there." Naari frowned. "And you think they'll help a widow and child?" He let out a slow breath. "I think they owe me a favor." That wasn't an answer. Naari narrowed her gaze at him. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't stop walking, didn't hesitate. "Because someone should." That again. She hated that answer. She hated that he made it sound so simple. Naari picked up her pace until she was nearly beside him. And what happens when that favor isn't enough? Garrick's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept moving. "Then we figure something else out." Her frustration flared. "That's not a plan," she snapped. He stopped. For the first time since they'd met, his expression shifted. The patience in his eyes was gone, replaced with something sharper, something tired. "You think I have all the answers?" he asked, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. Naari's breath caught. Garrick shook his head slightly. "I don't. I never have. But I do know that standing here arguing about it won't keep that kid alive." His gaze flickered to Lior, then back to her. "So, if you got a better plan, say it. Otherwise, let's keep moving." Naari's throat tightened. Because she didn't have a better plan. She had nothing. And she hated that he was right. Her grip on Lior's frail body tightened. She could feel the faint heat of his fever against her chest, his breath shallow and slow. He was running out of time. Naari swallowed hard. She looked at Garrick, standing there in the dim light, waiting. She had spent years believing she could only rely on herself, that she had to. But right now, with her son's life hanging in the balance, she didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. Her hands curled into fists. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she gave one small nod. Garrick didn't gloat, didn't smirk like he had won something. He just nodded back. "Let's go." And for the first time in a long time, Naari let someone else take the lead. The air inside the transport hub was thick with the scent of fuel and damp metal, the low hum of machinery vibrating beneath their feet. It was a place designed for movement. People came and went, ships docked and departed, but no one lingered. No one wanted to be noticed. That worked in their favor. Naari kept Lior pressed against her chest, his small body wrapped tightly in her cloak. He was dangerously warm now, his breathing shallow. The fever had taken hold. He needed medicine, real food, and rest, not the stolen scraps she had been surviving on. Garrick moved ahead of her, his shoulders tense, but his steps confident. He belonged here, or at least knew how to act like he did. They wove through the crowd, slipping past off-world traders, weary laborers, and travelers waiting for transport off the planet. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the stained metal floors. No one paid them any attention. That was the only reason they were still alive. Nari tightened her grip on Lior and quickened her pace to keep up with Garrick. She hated this, hated following him, hated needing him, hated that, despite everything, she had no other choice. Garrick stopped near the far end of the terminal, scanning the crowd before stepping toward a rusted doorway half hidden by stacked cargo crates. He turned to her, voice low. "Stay here." Nari narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "Because I need to talk to my contact alone," he said simply. "And you sticking to my side isn't going to make that easier." Her fingers curled into the fabric of her cloak. "And I'm just supposed to trust you to come back?" His expression didn't change. "No, you're supposed to trust that I need to get off this planet just as much as you do." She hated that answer, but it wasn't wrong. Before she could argue, he slipped into the doorway, vanishing into the dimly lit corridor beyond. Nari exhaled sharply, shifting Lior in her arms. He whimpered softly, his small fingers twitching. She pressed a hand against his forehead. Too warm, too fragile. She couldn't lose him, not after everything. A voice cut through the terminal, rough and sharp. "Hey, you." Nari went rigid. A man stood a few feet away, his uniform unmistakable. "Patrol." Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She lowered her head, turning slightly to shield Lior's face. "Don't run. Running is suspicious." The patrolman stepped closer. "Didn't I see you in the market district?" Nari's mind raced. "Lie. Deny. Get away." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, keeping her voice low, careful. "I've been here for hours." The man frowned, studying her. "You look familiar." Nari's grip on Lior tightened. The patrolman's eyes flicked to the bundle in her arms. "What's wrong with the kid?" She forced herself to stay still. "He's sick." The man's frown deepened. Then, recognition. Nari saw it happen. The moment he remembered. The widow who stole. The child in her arms. The human who interfered. Her stomach dropped. His hand moved toward the radio on his belt. She had no choice. Nari moved. She surged forward, slamming into him before he could react. Her elbow struck his ribs, knocking him off balance. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it hard, forcing the radio from his grip before he could call for backup. The patrolman cursed, stumbling back, reaching for his weapon. A gunshot echoed through the terminal. For a single, frozen second, Nari thought she had been shot. But then, the patrolman crumpled. Garrick stood a few feet away, his gun still raised, his expression unreadable. The terminal went silent. Then chaos erupted. People shouted, panicked. A gunshot in a place like this meant trouble. Garrick was already moving, closing the space between them in an instant. "We need to go." Nari couldn't speak, couldn't move. She had just attacked a patrol officer. Garrick grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Nari!" That snapped her out of it. She ran. Lior whimpered against her chest, but she held him tight, forcing her legs to move, forcing herself to keep up. Garrick led them through a service corridor, past rusted pipes and flickering emergency lights. He didn't slow down, didn't look back. Finally, he stopped at a sealed docking bay, slamming his fist against the panel beside the door. "Come on, come on." Nari's breathing was ragged, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Tell me you have a plan." The door hissed open. Garrick turned to her, his gaze sharp. "We get on that ship. We leave." Nari hesitated. If she got on that ship, there was no turning back. No more running. No more waiting for the next disaster. She looked down at Lior. His breathing was too shallow, his skin too warm. He wouldn't survive if she didn't take this chance. Nari made her choice. She stepped forward, and for the first time in years, she was running toward something instead of away. The ship's engines rumbled beneath them, a steady vibration that hummed through the floor and up Nari's spine. The cargo hold smelled of rust and burned fuel, the air thick with the metallic tang of old machinery. It was dimly lit, the flickering overhead strips casting long shadows across the metal crates stacked haphazardly along the walls. She sat on the cold floor, her back pressed against the bulkhead, Leor curled in her arms. His fever had worsened. His breaths were shallow, each one a whisper of warmth against her collarbone. She ran her fingers over his damp forehead, brushing aside strands of violet hair. His small hands, usually so full of restless energy, lay limp against her chest. Her stomach twisted. He needed medicine, needed real care. And all she had was the faint promise of a man she barely knew. Across the hold, Garrick stood near the ship's entry hatch, speaking in low tones with the pilot, a grizzled woman with sharp eyes and a mechanical arm. Nari hadn't caught her name. Garrick had called in a favor, and the woman hadn't asked questions. She'd simply opened the hatch and gotten them off the planet, which meant this wasn't charity. Nari watched them closely, scanning their body language, the way the pilot's fingers tapped against the metal of her prosthetic in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The conversation was short, but something about the tension in Garrick's shoulders set her on edge. Whatever he had promised to get them here, it had cost him. The pilot walked off without another glance, leaving Garrick standing in the dim light. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck before turning toward Naari. She tensed as he approached. He crouched down beside her, his gaze flickering to Leor before meeting hers. How bad? Naari's grip on Leor tightened. The answer was too bad, but she couldn't afford to say that. Couldn't afford to acknowledge the gnawing fear clawing at her ribs. He needs a medic, she said, keeping her voice steady. Not just rest. Not food. Real help. Garrick's jaw tensed slightly. We'll get him to one. When? A pause. Too long of a pause. Naari narrowed her eyes. You don't have a plan. I have options. That's not the same thing. He held her gaze. It's the best I can give you right now. Her fingers curled into the fabric of Leor's blanket. That's not enough. I know, he said quietly. The honesty in his voice startled her. He wasn't making empty promises. He wasn't feeding her false hope, but it still wasn't enough. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. If you can't get us to a medic, tell me now. I'll find another way. Garrick leaned back on his heels, studying her. You don't have another way. That struck something raw inside her. She stiffened, every muscle in her body tightening. Then I'll make one. Garrick sighed, running a hand over his face. Naari, listen. I don't need reassurances, she snapped. I need something real. Garrick's fingers twitched, and for the first time, frustration flickered across his face. I know, he repeated, quieter this time. I know you don't trust me. I know you're scared. I know you'd rather claw your way out of this with your bare hands than let someone help you. But right now, this is what we have. Naari clenched her jaw. He wasn't wrong, and that made it worse. She looked down at Leor, brushing her fingers lightly over his small, fragile hand. His skin was too warm, his breaths too soft. I told you I'd help, Garrick said. Naari swallowed hard. You don't even know why you're helping. He was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, Maybe I do. The words sent a strange ripple through her chest. She looked up at him, but his gaze had shifted, focused on Leor. Something flickered behind his eyes. Something she didn't understand. Before she could ask, he stood. Outer Rim Station. I know someone there. She frowned. Someone who actually owes you a favor, or someone who'll put a price on our heads. His lips twitched slightly. Both. She exhaled through her nose. Fantastic. He turned toward the hatch. Try to get some rest. Naari didn't answer. She didn't sleep easily. Not anymore. She shifted, adjusting Leor in her arms, pressing her forehead lightly against his. His fingers twitched just barely. It was enough. For now. She let out a slow breath. Garrick reached the doorway, hesitating just long enough to glance back at her. You'll get him through this, he said. Naari didn't look up, didn't respond. But as the door hissed shut behind him, she realized something strange. The Outer Rim Station loomed ahead, a massive structure of metal and glass suspended in the void, its skeletal framework glowing against the darkness of space. The docking lights pulsed in slow intervals, signaling the approach of incoming ships. Inside the cargo hold of the vessel, Naari held Leor close, feeling the faint rise and fall of his chest against hers. His fever had not broken, but his breathing was steadier now. The recycled air of the ship was cool against her skin, yet she felt suffocated, trapped between uncertainty and the fragile hope that had led her this far. Across from her, Garrick stood with arms crossed, his gaze locked on the station through the reinforced viewport. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his stance, a quiet alertness that told her he wasn't fully at ease either. The ship's comm crackled, and the pilot's voice, Saris, as Garrick had finally named her, came through. "We're cleared for docking. You've got 5 minutes before I start charging Rhett." Nari shifted, adjusting Lior's weight in her arms. "This contact of yours," she said, her voice low but firm. "Are they actually going to help us?" Garrick glanced at her, his jaw tightening slightly. "They'll help." She studied him, searching for the hesitation he wasn't showing. "And the cost?" His eyes flickered just briefly before he exhaled. "I'll handle it." That wasn't an answer. Before she could press further, the ship lurched, the docking clamps locking into place with a heavy thud. The artificial gravity of the station settled over them, anchoring them back into a world where choices mattered again. Saris's voice rang out over the comm. "Welcome to the Outer Rim. Try not to get shot." Garrick moved first, pressing the release on the hatch. The doors hissed open, revealing the docking bay beyond, a cavernous space filled with cargo haulers, transport shuttles, and mechanics moving between them like restless ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of fuel, hot metal, and the sharp tang of ozone from ship exhaust. Nari hesitated at the threshold. Stepping off this ship meant committing to whatever lay ahead. It meant trusting Garrick. She exhaled slowly, then stepped forward. The station's artificial lighting cast harsh shadows, illuminating the rough edges of a place built on unspoken deals and quiet survival. This was not a world of kindness. It was a world of bargains and debts, and she was about to become part of it. Garrick led the way through the winding corridors, past vendors selling parts that had long since been outlawed, past travelers who kept their heads down and their hands close to their weapons. Every step felt like a risk. Naari kept Lior shielded against her chest, ignoring the weight of curious stares as they passed. The child barely stirred, his fevered body radiating heat against her arms. Finally, Garrick stopped in front of a reinforced door, pressing his knuckles against the metal in a rhythmic pattern. A coded knock. A pause. Then, with a low mechanical hiss, the door unlocked. A woman stood on the other side, tall and lean, her amber eyes sharp beneath a mess of cropped, dark hair. She wore a long coat that concealed far more weapons than it revealed. Her gaze flickered over Naari and Lior before settling on Garrick. "Didn't think I'd see you again," she said, her tone edged with amusement, and something else Naari couldn't place. "Didn't plan on it," Garrick replied, his voice even, "but I need a favor." The woman's lips curled into something between a smirk and a challenge. "Of course you do." She stepped aside. "Get in before someone starts asking why I'm entertaining guests." Naari hesitated only for a second before following Garrick inside. The room was small but efficient. A med station mixed with an armory, crates of supplies stacked against the walls, a makeshift cot pushed into the corner. It smelled of sterilized metal and coolant, the air thick with the hum of old machinery. The woman shut the door behind them, locking it manually before turning back. She gestured to Lior. "Kid's burning up." Naari's grip tightened instinctively. "That's why we're here." The woman gave Garrick a pointed look. "You're lucky I like you." "Debatable," he muttered. Still, she moved, grabbing a small diagnostic scanner from a nearby crate and kneeling beside Naari. She extended the device, but paused, meeting Naari's gaze. A silent question, a silent test. Naari hesitated only for a second before loosening her grip on Lior, just enough for the woman to work. The scanner emitted a soft beep as she ran it over the child's frail frame, her expression shifting slightly as she read the results. After a long moment, she exhaled. "Bad, but not irreversible. He's fighting, but he needs stabilizers, fluids, heat regulation." She stood, crossing the room to retrieve a med case. I can help. Relief threatened to knock the air from Naari's lungs, but she forced herself to remain still. How much? The woman paused, glancing at Garrick. I assume he didn't tell you. Naari's stomach twisted. Tell me what? Garrick ran a hand over his jaw. It's covered. The woman let out a sharp laugh. Oh, you poor thing. You really think this man walks away from anything without a cost? Naari turned to him, her pulse thudding in her ears. What did you promise? Garrick met her gaze, steady and unreadable. Nothing that concerns you. Everything concerns me. Her voice was sharper than she intended. Tell me. A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he didn't look away. Finally, the woman sighed, rolling her eyes. He's running one job for me. A delivery. That's all. Naari's stomach tightened. What kind of delivery? Garrick exhaled. It doesn't matter. It does to me. A beat of silence. Then, finally, he said weapons. Naari felt the weight of that word settle between them. A weapons deal. On a station like this. This wasn't just a risk. It was a line. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. And if something goes wrong, Garrick's lips pressed into a thin line. Then I make sure it doesn't. Naari exhaled slowly, forcing herself to swallow the bitter frustration rising in her chest. Lior needed this, and Garrick had already made the deal. She looked down at her son, brushing her fingers gently over his too warm skin. She had spent so long surviving alone. But not today. Not this time. She lifted her gaze to Garrick, studying the lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders. She hated this. She hated that it had come to this. But for the first time, when she looked at him, she didn't just see a risk. She saw a man who had crossed a line for her, and she wasn't sure what to do with that. The woman returned with an injector, kneeling beside Lior. This will help. Naari nodded once, then reached out and let someone else take care of him. For the first time, she wasn't alone. It had been 6 days since they arrived at the Outer Rim station. 6 days of waiting, of watching, of hovering over Lior as he fought the fever that had nearly stolen him away. 6 days of Naari, sitting beside his small cot, counting every breath, measuring every moment of stillness, dreading what might come next. But today, everything changed. Sunlight, real, golden sunlight, spilled in through the reinforced glass panel of the station's observation deck. It wasn't much, just a sliver of natural light filtering through the massive orbital rings surrounding the planet below, but it was enough to cast a warm glow across the small room where Lior finally stirred, blinked, and looked up at her with clear, fever-free eyes. Naari barely breathed. Then, his small fingers curled around hers, warm but not burning. Her chest tightened, and before she could stop herself, she let out a ragged, disbelieving breath, half a sob, half a laugh. Lior, she whispered, smoothing his violet hair back from his forehead. You're awake. His voice was hoarse, small but steady. Mama, her heart clenched. It had been days since he had spoken. She cupped his face, her fingers trembling. I'm here. A sleepy, confused frown creased his little brow. Did we make it? Naari let out a breathless laugh, pressing her forehead to his. Yes, little star. We made it. Behind her, a quiet voice broke the moment. Told you he was too stubborn to go anywhere. She turned. Garrick stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but there was something softer in his expression. The sharp edges of his usual smirk were dulled, replaced by something quieter, something almost relieved. Naari swallowed hard, blinking away the last of her lingering fear. You kept your promise. Garrick shrugged, stepping forward. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. She studied him, the weight of the last week settling between them. The running, the fear, the choices he had made for her and Lior, the risk he had taken. A human who had stepped into her life when he didn't have to. A man who had crossed a line to save her son. Naari stood, her legs unsteady from exhaustion, and something else, something unfamiliar. Garrick's gaze flickered down to her hands, still trembling. Without thinking, without hesitation, he reached out. Warm, steady, a silent reassurance. She should have pulled away, but she didn't. Instead, her fingers curled around his, gripping tight. Thank you, she said softly, the words thick with meaning. Garrick tilted his head slightly, his smirk returning, but softer this time. Don't go getting sentimental on me now. Naari huffed a quiet laugh, shaking her head. Too late. And before she could talk herself out of it, before she could remind herself of all the reasons this should be impossible, she stepped closer, closing the space between them, and kissed him. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was slow, steady, a recognition, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had survived, everything that had changed. Garrick didn't pull away, didn't flinch. He kissed her back, his hand resting gently against her waist, grounding her. And for the first time in years, Naari wasn't afraid. She had spent so long running, fighting, surviving. But now, as she pulled back and saw the warmth in Garrick's dark eyes, she knew she had finally found something more, something worth staying for, a new beginning, and she was ready for it.